Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most powerful and absolutely most debated institutions in the entire world, the Supreme Court of the United States. We're going to trace its totally unexpected history, its massive evolution over the years, and dive into the very real proposals being debated right now to change its future.
Now, to really grasp where the court is today, we kind of have to realize how it started. In Federalist No. 78, Alexander Hamilton famously described the judiciary as the least dangerous branch with no influence over either the sword or the purse. It's a pretty humorous juxtaposition to how we view the court today, right? The framers originally considered the judicial branch to be something of an afterthought. They didn't see it as the titan it is now. They just saw it as a quiet, secondary player in the grand scheme of this new republic.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the architectural sketch. Second, the great historical shifts. Third, modern alternatives. And finally, the path forward.
Act 1. The Framers' Architectural Sketch.
So let's transition back to Philadelphia for a second. It's 1787. When the delegates were mapping out Article 3 of the Constitution, the blueprint was, well, surprisingly sparse. It established one Supreme Court, but they left the actual number of seats entirely up to Congress to figure out. For the selection process, they created a two-step filter: presidential nomination and Senate confirmation. And crucially, they granted federal judges life tenure, or, as they wrote, during good behavior. This wasn't designed to create untouchable rulers. Actually, it was explicitly engineered to insulate judges from the political whims of angry presidents or, a volatile voting public.
But early on, that insulation wasn't really needed because they had hardly any power to insulate. When the court first met in 1790, it had just 6 justices. They convened at New York City's Royal Exchange Building because they didn't even have a permanent courtroom to call their own. Frankly, they commanded very little respect. Being a Supreme Court justice meant arduous travel on horseback just to hear local cases. In fact, many early justices actually resigned because the job was just so unappealing.
Act 2. The Great Historical Shifts.
So the crucial point is that this early weakness definitely did not last long. In 1803, under Chief Justice John Marshall, the court engineered what could really be called its ultimate power grab in Marbury v. Madison. Marshall established judicial review. This is the unwritten right of the court to declare acts of Congress unconstitutional. With just one single stroke, the court claimed the absolute final say on what the Constitution actually means. If we look at the timeline following the court's founding, the size of the bench functioned basically like a political accordion. Congress changed the number of seats 6 different times to match the goals of whoever was in power at the moment, peaking at 10 justices under Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't until 1869 that Congress finally locked it at the 9 seats we know today. And honestly, confirmations were mostly quiet until 1987. That's when the nomination of Robert Bork permanently turned judicial confirmations into the deeply partisan, high-stakes battles we recognize today.
Which brings us to a very significant number in the modern era: 51. Today, with the 60-vote filibuster threshold for Supreme Court nominees officially eliminated, that means a bare, simple majority of just 51 Senate votes is all it takes to secure a lifetime seat on the nation's highest court.
Act 3. The Selection Dilemma and Modern Alternatives.
Because the court's rulings shape absolutely everything, from your civil liberties to major federal regulations, many argue that tying vacancies to the random timing of a justice's death or strategic retirement is fundamentally flawed. So the most popular mainstream blueprint to fix this is staggered 18-year term limits. Under this plan, life tenure is replaced by fixed terms, and they're staggered so a vacancy opens up exactly every 2 years. This highly structured system ensures every single president gets exactly 2 nominations per 4-year term. The logic here is that it effectively removes the political gamification of aging justices holding on to their seats until a friendly administration takes over.
Let's move to the next alternative and see how this builds. An entirely different approach is the balanced bench, or what's known as the 5-5-5 plan. This 15-justice model actively attempts to strip partisan polarization right out of the process. So first, 10 of those seats are evenly divided: 5 permanent Republican-appointed justices and 5 permanent Democratic-appointed justices. Then comes the twist. Those 10 partisan justices are required to unanimously select the remaining 5 non-affiliated moderate justices from the lower federal appeals courts. The whole goal is to force consensus and eliminate ideological supermajorities entirely.
Now, a third alternative is the Merit Selection Commission, This borrows heavily from the Missouri Plan, which is already used in a bunch of U.S. states and even several European democracies. Instead of the president just picking any legal or political ally they want, an independent, nonpartisan commission made up of legal scholars, retired judges, people like that, takes the lead. They vet the candidates and present a binding shortlist of 3 to 5 highly qualified, ideologically moderate candidates to the president. So this model shifts that initial power of choice away from pure politics and places it right into an independent, merit-based vetting process.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it synthesizes these options for us. When we weigh these models side by side, the trade-offs become incredibly clear. The current system offers complete judicial independence, sure, but it is highly vulnerable to polarization. Term limits equalize presidential influence, but they face intense debates over whether they're actually constitutional. And the balanced bench? Well, it minimizes supermajorities, but requires a deeply, deeply complex logistical setup. Every single solution carries its own unique structural weight.
Conclusion: the steep path forward.
While these modern alternatives are actually gaining some real traction in public polling and legislative drafts, the structural reality is tough. The distance between a proposal and reality is vast. Any attempt to eliminate life tenure or drastically restructure the selection process cannot simply be passed like a normal law without massive friction. It must either survive a fierce constitutional challenge in the courts or achieve the nearly impossible task of a formal constitutional amendment. Altering the framers' original blueprint is, for sure, a monumental uphill climb.
Which leaves us with this final overarching question to ponder. We have watched this institution evolve from a literal afterthought in a borrowed room to a co-equal branch of government shaping modern American life. But as the friction between the court's design and today's political reality grows, we really have to ask, can a 1787 blueprint truly support a 21st century democracy? Or is this accidental Leviathan finally due for a deliberate redesign? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.